My boss publicly joked that I only had my job because of my legs. The room exploded in cruel laughter, some colleagues even nodding along. I didn't answer. I slid a crisp folder across the table. Inside, my new contract with his rival company and photos that could destroy him. The logo made his jaw tighten. Colleagues rushed to congratulate me. He opened the folder, paled, and the room was mine. The humiliation arrived not with a shout but with a laugh. One moment I was navigating the crowded room and the next my heel caught the carpet's edge, sending me stumbling gracelessly into a waiter's tray. The sharp clatter of silverware silenced the jazz quartet. And then came Sean's voice, smooth as poison. "Easy there, Beyoncé. We know you're trying to make an impact, but let's leave the acrobatics to the professionals." A few sycophantic chuckles rippled through the crowd. He wasn't done. He savored the moment, his eyes sweeping over my flustered form. "Let's be honest, you're only on this roster because of the view from behind that desk. Someone has to pretty up our client meetings." The Hartley Industries annual party continued around me, conversations resuming with awkward determination, but I remained frozen in that moment. 3 years of excellence, 3 years of arriving at 6 a.m. and leaving at midnight, 3 years of watching my work claimed by others. All reduced to a crude assessment of my anatomy. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. Hartley," I managed, my voice steady despite the burning in my chest. I walked away with whatever dignity remained, leaving him standing there with that satisfied smirk that I would later wipe from his face in ways he could never imagine. But that was 3 months ago. This morning I sat at my desk at 5:45 a.m., still replaying that moment while preparing another presentation that Sean would claim as his own. The Morrison merger analysis sprawled across my screen. 40 pages of financial modeling that would save Hartley Industries $14 million over 5 years. My name appeared nowhere on the document. By tomorrow's board meeting, it would be another trophy in Sean's collection of stolen brilliance. Robert, the security guard, knocked on my cubicle wall with his usual morning greeting. "Miss Williams, you're gonna burn yourself out. Even machines need rest." He'd been saying variations of this for 3 years, genuine concern creasing his weathered face. What Robert didn't understand was that machines didn't have mothers who cleaned office buildings at night to fund their daughter's MIT education. Machines didn't have student loans that consumed half their salary. Machines didn't have to prove they were more than diversity statistics on corporate reports. The morning meeting arrived with its usual casual dismissals. I presented a cost-saving strategy for our supplier contracts. 6 weeks of analysis condensed into 15 minutes of precision. When I finished, Richard, the CFO, turned to Mike from procurement. "What's your take on this approach, Mike?" Mike, who'd been checking sports scores during my presentation, suddenly became animated. "Well, we'd need to really analyze the numbers, but conceptually it could work." The numbers I'd just spent 15 minutes explaining. The contracts I'd personally renegotiated. The $2 million in annual savings I'd identified through algorithms I'd developed on weekends while Mike played golf with Sean. Jennifer from HR caught my eye with that sympathetic smile I'd grown to despise. Later, she'd corner me about joining the Women's Initiative Committee, the corporate equivalent of Exile where female employees plan diversity workshops instead of mergers. My MIT degree in financial engineering, my risk assessment models that generated millions in revenue, my consistent outperformance of every metric. All irrelevant compared to my ability to represent my gender in promotional materials. Lunch brought the hardest conversation. My mother called, her voice bright with manufactured optimism. "Any news about that promotion, baby?" 2 years. 2 years of being next in line, while watching men with half my experience vault over me into corner offices. "Still working on it, Mom. These things take time." "You work so hard," she said, and I heard the unspoken question, why wasn't hard work enough? She'd sacrificed everything believing that education would be the great equalizer, that her daughter's brilliance would overcome any barrier. How could I tell her that my excellence had become a resource to be mined by others, that every innovation I created would be presented to the board by someone who couldn't even pronounce amortization correctly? My sister's text arrived minutes later. "Struggling with my performance review. How do you stay so confident? You're my inspiration." Inspiration. If she knew that her successful older sister had found her rejected promotion paperwork in the recycling bin, Sean's coffee stain obscuring the part where my direct supervisor had recommended me. If she knew about the crying sessions in the parking garage, the anxiety medication hidden in my desk drawer, the resignation letters I drafted but never sent. The afternoon accumulated its usual indignities. Tom asked me to explain my risk assessment model for the fourth time before presenting it to clients as his innovation. Sandra suggested I smile more in meetings. David wondered if I really needed to attend the strategy session since someone should stay behind to handle the phones. By 9 p.m., the office had emptied except for me and the ghosts of the ambitions I'd carried through these doors 3 years ago. I was formatting another report that would bear Sean's name when I sensed someone behind me. Albert Hartley stood at my cubicle entrance, the company founder whose appearances on our floor were as rare as recognition for my work. His eyes moved deliberately across my desk, lingering on the drawer I'd left slightly open where my hidden commendations lay like archaeological evidence of a buried career. "Working late again, Miss Williams?" Not a question but an observation that seemed to carry weight. "Just finishing the quarterly analysis, Mr. Hartley." He stepped closer, pulling out one of my hidden commendations with deliberate care. "Interesting that excellence can be so invisible," he said, studying the award as if it were evidence of something larger. "Tell me, do you know what distinguishes truly successful people from those who merely work hard?" "I'm not sure I follow." "Sometimes," he said, replacing the commendation with precision, "the best players are those who appear not to be playing at all. Those who understand that the game has levels most people don't even know exist." He turned to leave, then paused at the cubicle entrance. "Your Morrison merger analysis was exceptional, by the way. The real one. Not the butchered version that will be presented tomorrow." Before I could respond, he disappeared into the elevator, leaving only questions and the unsettling sense that I'd just been evaluated for something beyond my understanding. I sat back in my chair, staring at the report on my screen. Tomorrow Sean would present my work to the board. They would praise his insight while I sat in the back row, invisible as always, adding another stolen idea to my mental catalog of professional injustices. But tonight felt different. Albert Hartley knew. He'd seen through the charade, recognized the theft, understood the systematic erasure of my contributions. His cryptic words about players and games and hidden levels echoed in my mind. For 3 years I'd been playing by rules designed for my failure. I'd accepted that my role was to generate excellence for others to claim, to be the invisible engine driving visible success. The party humiliation had been the most public demonstration of my true position at Hartley Industries. Not a respected professional, but decoration with a convenient ability to produce profitable strategies. Perhaps it was time to learn a different game entirely. One where humiliation became fuel, where invisibility became an advantage, where 3 years of stolen work could be transformed into something far more valuable than recognition. The cursor blinked on my screen, waiting for tomorrow's theft to be completed. But my mind was already elsewhere, considering possibilities I'd never allowed myself to imagine. The cursor still blinked on my screen, but my fingers had stopped moving. Albert Hartley's words lingered in the empty office like smoke from a fire I couldn't yet see. I saved the report, closed my laptop, and gathered my things with mechanical precision. Tomorrow would come with its usual thefts and dismissals, but tonight something had shifted in the geography of my understanding. 3 days later, the annual company party arrived with all the forced festivity of a mandatory celebration. I stood before my bedroom mirror at 6 p.m., holding 2 dresses, the black one that whispered authority and the navy one that suggested approachability. Navy one. Professional but not severe, elegant without trying too hard. The balance women at Hartley Industries had to strike daily, except tonight the stakes felt higher, though I couldn't articulate why. The grand ballroom at the Meridian Hotel transformed our daily corporate battles into something deceptively civilized. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over conversations that would determine next year's promotions, bonuses, and terminations. The jazz quartet played Cole Porter while executives performed their annual pantomime of accessibility, pretending the hierarchy that crushed us Monday through Friday could be suspended for one evening of sponsored revelry. I arrived fashionably on time, not early enough to seem desperate, not late enough to be noticed. The bartender, a young woman with knowing eyes, poured my sparkling water without judgment. I'd learned that alcohol at company events was a luxury reserved for those whose mistakes wouldn't be catalogued and weaponized. Beyoncé. Jennifer from HR materialized beside me, her smile bright with wine and genuine warmth. You look lovely. Is that dress new? 3 years old, I admitted, though I'd had it tailored last month when my stress-induced weight loss made everything hang wrong. Jennifer leaned closer, her voice dropping. Richard's been asking about your cost-saving proposal. I think he's finally seeing what you bring to the table. False hope. I recognized it like an old friend who only visited before disappointments. But I smiled, played the game, let her believe that merit might finally matter. The room filled with familiar faces wearing unfamiliar expressions. Tom from accounting actually acknowledged my existence. Sandra from marketing complimented my presentation skills. Even the board members, usually as accessible as museum sculptures, seemed to notice me standing there, existing, contributing to the carefully curated diversity of the gathering. Albert Hartley occupied his usual corner, a glass of what looked like scotch untouched in his hand. He caught my eye once, nodded almost imperceptibly, then returned to his observation post. Something about his presence felt different tonight, less passive, more anticipatory. I navigated through clusters of conversation, discussing quarterly projections with clients, defending my merger analysis to skeptical investors, pretending that my ideas wouldn't be attributed to someone else by Monday morning. The navy dress moved perfectly, professional armor that made me feel, for these few hours, like I belonged in these rooms where million-dollar decisions were made between courses. The stumble happened at 9:17 p.m. I know the exact time because the grandfather clock in the corner had just finished chiming. My heel, a sensible 2-inch pump, nothing provocative, caught where the carpet met the marble threshold. Not even a full fall, just a slight forward pitch that made me reach for the nearest surface to steady myself, which happened to be a waiter's serving tray. The crash of silverware against marble created a silence that rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. The jazz quartet stuttered to a stop. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the room turned toward me, frozen in that graceless moment between standing and falling. Sean's laugh came first, rich with the satisfaction of discovering unexpected ammunition. He stood near the bar, his Italian suit impeccable, his expression transforming from surprise to predatory delight. Easy there, Beyonce. His voice carried across the hushed room with practiced projection. We know you're trying to make an impact, but let's leave the acrobatics to the professionals. The sycophantic chuckle started with his inner circle. Brad, Tom, the senior managers who understood that their career advancement depended on laughing at the CEO's jokes, especially the cruel ones. But Sean wasn't finished. He stepped forward, closing the distance like a hunter approaching wounded prey. Though I suppose coordination isn't really what we hired you for, is it? He paused, letting the implication settle over the room like ash. His eyes swept over me with theatrical assessment. Let's be honest, you're only on this roster because of the view from behind that desk. Someone has to pretty up our client meetings. The words landed with precision, each one calculated to reduce 3 years of excellence to a crude evaluation of my body. The laughter that followed wasn't universal. I saw Jennifer's face drain of color, watched Albert Hartley's expression tighten almost imperceptibly, noticed several younger employees look away in discomfort. But enough people laughed. Enough to make it clear where the power lay, whose humiliation was acceptable entertainment. I stood perfectly still, my spine straight despite the trembling in my hands. Every instinct screamed to run, to cry, to throw the remaining champagne in his smug face. Instead, I summoned every lesson my mother had taught me about dignity in the face of cruelty. Enjoy your evening, Mr. Hartley, I said, my voice carrying a steadiness I didn't feel. I turned and walked through the silent crowd, my heels clicking against marble with metronomic precision. Behind me, I heard Sean making another joke about hiring practices, riding the high of public cruelty. The jazz quartet resumed playing, conversations restarted with forced brightness, and the party continued its charade of civilization. In my peripheral vision, I caught Marcus Chin lifting his phone, adjusting its angle with subtle precision. At the time, I thought he was just another colleague documenting my humiliation for tomorrow's office gossip. I wouldn't learn until later that he'd captured everything, every word, every laugh, every complicit smile, and that Thomas Reynolds would watch that recording over breakfast, seeing not just my humiliation but an opportunity. The walk to the parking garage stretched like a funeral procession. My phone vibrated with messages I couldn't bear to read. The valet retrieved my car with exaggerated kindness, the type reserved for people who'd been publicly destroyed. I drove home on autopilot, my mind replaying the scene with obsessive precision, cataloging every face that had laughed, every colleague who'd remained silent, every supposed ally who'd chosen political survival over basic decency. But by the time I pulled into my apartment complex, something had crystallized in my chest, harder than anger, colder than hurt. I wouldn't quit. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't give Sean the satisfaction of breaking what he'd tried to reduce. Instead, sitting in my car with the engine cooling and the weight of humiliation still pressing against my ribs, I made a different choice. I would document everything. Build something undeniable. Transform this moment from my destruction into his. My apartment door closed behind me with a finality that echoed through empty rooms. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off the heels that had betrayed me, and stood in my kitchen wearing a dress that now felt like evidence of a crime. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Normal sounds in a world that had tilted off its axis 40 minutes ago. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. By Monday morning, I'd perfected the art of looking unbroken. Foundation covered the dark circles, coffee steadied my hands, and I walked into Hartley Industries at 6:15 a.m. wearing armor disguised as a charcoal pantsuit. Robert wasn't at his usual post. The substitute guard, someone young who didn't know my name, buzzed me in without the familiar greeting. Even that small absence felt like another loss in a weekend of reckonings. The office breathed differently around me now. Conversations stuttered when I approached the coffee machine. Eyes slid away from mine in the elevator. I'd become something uncomfortable, not quite victim, not quite colleague, but a walking reminder that Hartley Industries had shown its true face at the Meridian Hotel ballroom. My computer booted up with its usual corporate cheerfulness, displaying 17 emails sent over the weekend. 12 were variations of "thinking of you" from colleagues who'd laughed at Sean's joke. 4 were meeting requests I knew would be mysteriously cancelled. 1 was from my sister asking how the party went. I deleted them all and opened the Morrison merger file instead. My name appeared nowhere on the documents, but my fingerprints were everywhere. In the risk algorithms, the integration timeline, the staffing projections that would determine whether 200 people kept their jobs. Tomorrow, Sean would present this to the board as his vision. Today, I photographed every page with my personal phone, creating timestamps that proved what everyone already knew but no one would acknowledge. Beyoncé. Sean's voice behind me carried the satisfaction of a cat who'd cornered a mouse. Glad to see you're not letting Friday's little incident affect your performance. Little incident. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes with an expression I'd practiced in my bathroom mirror. Of course not, Mr. Hartley. I understand how these social situations can become animated. His smile widened at my apparent submission. Good. We're implementing sensitivity training next quarter. HR's idea, not mine, but I suppose it can't hurt to remind people about appropriate workplace behavior. The irony was so thick I could taste it. The man who'd reduced me to body parts in front of the entire company was concerned about sensitivity. That sounds very progressive, I managed. He leaned against my cubicle wall, too close, his cologne aggressive in the small space. You know, Beyoncé, you could have a real future here if you learn to take things less personally. Not everything is about gender. Of course not, I agreed, documenting his proximity with my peripheral vision, adding it to the catalog of violations I was building for reasons I couldn't yet articulate. He left with the swagger of someone who'd won a battle I hadn't realized we were fighting. I returned to my screen, but my hands had started trembling. Not with fear or hurt, but with something sharper, more dangerous. Rage maybe. Or the birth of something that would eventually consume us both. Tuesday arrived with unexpected theater. At 2 p.m. security called me to the lobby. A courier waited there, not the usual rumpled delivery person but someone in a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. The envelope he handed me was heavy, cream-colored, my name written in fountain pen ink. I signed for it with hands that stayed steady through pure will, then carried it to the bathroom before opening it. Privacy felt essential for something that arrived with such ceremony. The letterhead read Reynolds Corporation, in understated gold embossing. Below, in handwriting that spoke of expensive education and careful consideration. Ms. Williams, your talents are wasted on those who can't see them. We see clearly. The next paragraph outlined an offer that made me sit down on the closed toilet lid. Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. A salary that doubled my current income. Immediate equity vesting. A signing bonus that would erase my student loans like they'd never existed. But it was the postscript that stopped my breathing. The Morrison merger strategy was brilliant. I know it was yours, not his. We value creators, not thieves. Someone had been watching. Someone with power, with resources, with the ability to see through Hartley Industries' careful facades. The signature read simply T. Reynolds, but I knew that name. Everyone in our industry did. That evening I abandoned sleep for research. My laptop screen glowed in my dark apartment as I dove into corporate archives, newspaper databases, court records that painted a picture I'd never imagined. Thomas Reynolds and Sean Hartley were stepbrothers. The connection was buried in old society pages, mentioned briefly in an obituary from 15 years ago. Their parents, Sean's mother and Thomas's father, had died in a car accident on the Hamptons Expressway. The will, contested but ultimately upheld, left everything to Sean as the biological heir. Thomas received nothing except his father's watch and whatever fury builds in a 19-year-old forced to watch his stepbrother inherit an empire. The parallel paths that followed read like a modern Cain and Abel. Sean took over Hartley Industries, coasting on 40 years of established success. Thomas built Reynolds Corporation from nothing, each acquisition and merger a deliberate echo of Hartley Industries' portfolio, each success a carefully aimed arrow at his stepbrother's legacy. Now Thomas was offering me a role in this biblical feud. Not just a job but a weapon. The ethical implications should have made me close the laptop immediately. Instead I thought about Sean's laughter, the board's complicity, 3 years of excellence erased by one crude assessment of my body. I drafted my response 6 times before settling on careful neutrality. Mr. Reynolds, your offer deserves thorough consideration. I have several projects requiring completion at Hartley Industries. May I have 3 weeks to ensure a smooth transition? Regards, Beyonce Williams. What I meant was, I need time to understand the full picture. To identify others who might share my situation. To ensure that when I leave Hartley Industries, I take more than just my personal belongings. Wednesday morning arrived with Sean presenting my work to the board while I sat in the back row, invisible as always but no longer passive. I photographed his entire presentation with my phone hidden in my lap, documenting the theft in real time. Around me, other employees took notes, asked questions, played their roles in the corporate theater. But I was done performing. The offer from Reynolds Corporation sat in my apartment like a loaded weapon, waiting for me to decide whether to aim it or walk away. The smart choice would be to accept immediately, to escape Hartley Industries with my dignity somewhat intact. Instead I began making a list of names. People who might understand what it meant to be brilliant and erased. People who'd been at that party, who'd seen my humiliation and felt something other than amusement. People who might be waiting, like me, for their moment to stop being invisible. Tomorrow I would start having careful conversations. Quiet lunches with Jennifer from H. Coffee with Marcus Chen, whose expression during my humiliation had been unreadable but whose phone had been positioned with suspicious precision. Even Daniel from accounting, who'd sent that simple text, "That was wrong." The revolution wouldn't begin with accepting Thomas Reynolds' offer. It would begin with understanding that I wasn't alone in this carefully decorated prison. That others might also be ready to stop pretending excellence could overcome exploitation. My phone buzzed with another message from my sister, asking for career advice. I started typing a response, then stopped. What wisdom could I offer? That hard work meant nothing if you wore the wrong body? That brilliance could be stolen as easily as breathing? Instead I wrote, building something important. We'll call soon. Because I was building something. Not just a case for leaving or a bridge to Reynolds Corporation, but something larger. Something that would ensure no one else would stand in a ballroom, reduced to their anatomy while their work walked out the door with someone else's name attached. The offer from Reynolds was a beginning, not an ending. And I had 3 weeks to turn it into something Sean Hartley would never see coming. The offer from Reynolds Corporation sat in my locked desk drawer like a ticking clock, but I wasn't ready to pull that trigger yet. Not until I understood the full scope of what I was walking away from, or perhaps what I could dismantle on my way out. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the atmosphere inside Hartley Industries. I'd started arriving even earlier, 5:45 a.m. now, using the quiet hours to dig through shared drives and old project files, building my understanding of patterns I'd been too naive to see before. Marcus Chin appeared at my cubicle at 7 a.m., holding a stack of what looked like quarterly reports. His appearance was so unremarkable: medium height, generic haircut, clothes that seemed designed to be forgotten, that most people walked past him without registering his presence. I'd done it myself for 3 years. "These need your review," he said loudly enough for anyone passing to hear. Then quieter, "Page 47 might interest you particularly." I flipped to page 47 after he left. Instead of quarterly projections, I found photocopies of expense reports. Sean's expense reports, specifically. Restaurant bills for client meetings, on days our client logs showed no appointments. Hotel charges in Miami during what was supposedly a conference in Boston. The kind of financial creativity that would make auditors salivate. Marcus returned at lunch, this time sliding into the chair across from me in the cafeteria where the ambient noise would mask our conversation. "I saw what happened at the party," he said, stirring his coffee with mechanical precision. "The recording came out well, by the way." My sandwich stopped halfway to my mouth. "Recording? Thomas Reynolds has it now. Has had it since Saturday morning." He took a sip of coffee, his expression never changing. "I've been sending him information for 2 years. Not for money, he's never paid me a cent. But someone needs to document what this place really is before it destroys every good person who walks through those doors." The pieces clicked together. Marcus's presence at every important meeting, his proximity to sensitive information despite his middle management title, his ability to remain employed despite producing no visible work that anyone could name. "Your forgettable appearance," I said slowly. "It's intentional." For the first time since I'd known him, Marcus smiled. "Gray man theory. Becomes so unremarkable that people forget you're in the room. They say things, leave documents out, have conversations they'd never have if they remembered the furniture had ears." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you're done playing by their rules. I can see it. And because Jennifer from HR wants to meet with you, but she's too scared to approach directly after what happened at the party." Jennifer, who'd offered me sympathy and committee positions but never actual support. "She's been documenting too," Marcus continued. "Every buried complaint, every discrimination lawsuit that mysteriously disappeared, every talented woman who left after hitting the ceiling you're currently bleeding against. She thinks she's alone in seeing it. She's not." The meeting with Jennifer happened that evening in the parking garage, level B3, between the concrete pillars where security cameras had blind spots. She looked different outside the office. Younger, more tired, carrying a weight I recognized from my own mirror. "I have files," she said without preamble, pulling a flash drive from her pocket. 3 years of documentation that would end careers if it ever saw daylight. "But I need to know you're serious about this. That you're not just angry about one bad night." "One bad night." The laugh that escaped me had edges. "Jennifer, he's stolen every piece of work I've created for 3 years. That party was just him finally saying out loud what this whole company has been doing silently." She studied me for a long moment, then handed over the drive. 17 women in the past decade whose strategies ended up with male supervisors' names on them. 32 harassment complaints filed and buried. A promotion rate for women that's 40% below industry standard, even accounting for experience and performance metrics. "You've been building a case." "I've been building a weapon," she corrected. "But I didn't know what to do with it." HR reports to Sean ultimately. The board doesn't care as long as profits stay steady. I thought maybe if I stayed long enough, accumulated enough evidence, things would change from the inside? Naive, right? She leaned against her car, exhaustion evident in every line. "Daniel from accounting has been tracking the financial irregularities. Expense fraud, investor misleading, the kind of things that actually get executives arrested. He's careful. Paranoid maybe. But he wants to meet." The 4 of us convened at Jennifer's apartment that Saturday. Her living room looked like a law firm's war room. Documents spread across every surface, laptops running analysis, a whiteboard covered in connections between names and dates. Daniel turned out to be younger than I'd expected, maybe 28, with the intense focus of someone who'd learned early that numbers were safer than people. "It's not just expense fraud," he said, pulling up spreadsheets on his laptop. "Sean's been cooking books for 3 years. Making divisions look profitable by shifting costs, hiding losses in subsidiary accounts, the kind of shell game that works until someone looks too closely. Which is why he needs my strategies to actually work, I said, understanding dawning. He can fake the numbers, but he needs real innovations to point to when investors ask questions. Exactly. Daniel adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit. But here's the thing, good people work here. The assistant who just had a baby, the security guard putting his kid through college, the cafeteria staff who've been here 20 years. If we burn this place down, we burn them too, Marcus finished. Which is why we need to be surgical. Remove the cancer without killing the patient. Jennifer pulled out a marker, started writing names on the whiteboard. Sean obviously. Richard in finance who enables him. The 3 board members who've been covering for him. Not covering, Daniel interrupted. Profiting. They've been selling stock based on insider knowledge of when Sean's going to announce my strategies as his innovations. The room went quiet. Securities fraud. That was federal territory. We're not just talking about workplace discrimination anymore, I said slowly. This is criminal, Marcus supplied. Which is why we need to be careful. And why we need to decide what we actually want. Justice, revenge, reform. I thought about the Reynolds offer sitting in my drawer. About Thomas Reynolds watching that video of my humiliation. About Albert Hartley's cryptic words about players and games. I want them to know it was us, I said finally. When it falls apart, when they're sitting in the wreckage of their careers, I want them to know that the people they made invisible are the ones who exposed them. Jennifer smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. Then we need more evidence. More documentation. And we need to be smarter than they think we're capable of being. How long? Daniel asked. I have 3 weeks, I said, thinking of my response to Reynolds. 3 weeks to gather everything we need. Marcus stood, gathering his things. Then we better get started. Because once we pull this trigger, there's no taking it back. As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years at Hartley Industries. Not hope exactly, but possibility. The weight of being alone in my observations, in my anger, had lifted. We were 4 people bound by different wounds but the same understanding. That systemic cruelty thrived in silence and isolation. Monday would come with its usual degradations. Sean would still claim my work. The board would still ignore my contributions. But now I knew I wasn't crazy or oversensitive or imagining patterns that weren't there. The network was real. The documentation was damning. And in 3 weeks, everything would change. Sunday night I sat at my kitchen table, the Reynolds Corporation offer letter spread before me beside my laptop and a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The network we'd built was solid, but I needed to formalize my exit strategy. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I finally dialed Thomas Reynolds' private number. His voice came through clear despite the late hour. Ms. Williams. I was wondering when you'd call. I'll accept your offer, I said, but I need 4 months before I can start. Pause. 4 months is unusual. Most people want to escape Hartley Industries as quickly as possible. I have a major project that requires completion. The lie came smoothly, though we both knew it wasn't about any official project. I believe in professional transitions. Professional transitions, he repeated, and I heard amusement in his tone. Of course. And during these 4 months, if you need resources, information about Hartley Industries' vulnerabilities, market analysis, anything, my team is at your disposal. The offer was tempting. Reynolds Corporation had resources that could crack Hartley Industries open like an egg. But I needed my evidence to be clean, unimpeachable, without any fingerprints that could trace back to corporate espionage. I appreciate that, Mr. Reynolds, but I prefer to handle my transitions independently. Ah. The single syllable carried understanding. You want your hands clean. Smart. But Ms. Williams, remember that Sean Hartley has enemies beyond just you. Some of us have been waiting years for someone with your position and motivation to act. Some of us. Enjoy the intercompany mixer on Thursday. I believe my assistant Lively Morrison will be attending. She's quite good at making friends. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, processing the implication. Reynolds wasn't just offering me a job, he was orchestrating something larger. Thursday's quarterly mixer at the Downtown Business Club felt different knowing what was coming. I positioned myself where I could observe without being obvious, nursing a sparkling water while watching the corporate theater unfold. Lively Morrison arrived at precisely 7:15 p.m. Where I'd expected someone obvious, tight dress, aggressive perfume, the kind of woman Sean typically pursued, I found subtle sophistication. Her dress was expensive but understated, her makeup minimal but flawless. She looked like what she was, a competent executive assistant who happened to be beautiful. She navigated the room with purpose disguised as wandering, collecting a drink here, laughing at a joke there, until she accidentally found herself at the bar next to Sean. The collision was perfectly orchestrated, her phone slipping from her hand just as he reached for his scotch, their hands brushing as they both bent to retrieve it. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice carrying just enough embarrassment to seem genuine. "No harm done," Sean replied, already appraising her with the look I'd seen him give every attractive woman who crossed his path. "Sean Hartley, CEO of Hartley Industries." "Lively Morrison. I work at Reynolds Corporation, just an assistant." The self-deprecation was calculated. Men like Sean preferred women who diminished themselves. Within 20 minutes he was buying her drinks and explaining the brilliance of the Morrison merger, my merger, while she listened with practiced fascination. She asked just the right questions, laughed at just the right moments, touched his arm just long enough to hook him but not long enough to seem forward. I turned away, slightly nauseated by the display but impressed by the performance. Lively Morrison was a professional and Sean was already caught. Monday morning brought an unexpected development. Albert Hartley stood in my cubicle when I arrived at 6 a.m., studying the awards still hidden in my drawer. "I have a special project for you, Ms. Williams," he said without preamble. "A comprehensive review of Hartley Industries' performance over the past decade. Historical analysis, pattern identification, strategic recommendations for the future." "That's quite extensive, Mr. Hartley. Why me?" His eyes met mine with an intensity that made me straighten. "Because you see patterns others miss. And because sometimes understanding where we've been is the only way to prevent repeating mistakes." The project authorization he handed me granted access to archives I'd never dreamed of touching. Board meeting minutes, private correspondence, financial records that predated Sean's tenure. It was like being handed keys to the kingdom's secret history. "I'll need full access to historical files," I said, testing boundaries. "Everything," he confirmed. "I want truth, Ms. Williams, not comfort." Over the next 2 weeks, I dove into Hartley Industries archives with the cover of Albert's special project. What I found made our network's discoveries look like surface scratches. The pattern went back 15 years, to when Sean first joined the company through his mother's marriage to Albert's brother. In the margins of old reports, I found Albert's handwritten notes. "Nepotism will destroy what merit built," appeared next to Sean's first promotion. "Sometimes the cure requires poison," was scrawled beside a failed attempt to implement performance-based advancement. The old man had been documenting his nephew's destruction of the company for years, but family loyalty, or perhaps family politics, had kept him from acting. Daniel helped me photograph everything, creating encrypted backups on drives we stored in separate locations. Jennifer cross-referenced the historical patterns with current HR violations, building a timeline that showed how each of Sean's promotions correlated with increased harassment complaints and female employee departures. Marcus, meanwhile, tracked Lively's progress with Sean. Within 3 weeks they were having drinks twice a week. She fed him just enough interest to keep him pursuing while extracting information with surgical precision. When did Hartley plan to announce the next merger? Which board members were loyal versus merely tolerant? What were the real numbers behind the quarterly projections? "She's remarkable," Marcus told me during one of our parking garage meetings. "She has him convinced that he's James Bond when really he's Austin Powers." The evidence mounted. Financial irregularities documented and verified. Harassment patterns established and corroborated. Intellectual property theft proven through timestamps and email trails. We weren't just building a case anymore. We were constructing a fortress of facts that would be impossible to assault. But it was a note I found in Albert's files that changed everything. Dated 3 years ago, the day I was hired, bringing in someone exceptional enough to create what he'll steal, strong enough to survive what he'll do to her, and smart enough to eventually understand the game. "She's the catalyst we've been waiting for." I stared at those words written before I'd ever walked through Hartley Industries' doors. Albert hadn't just been watching. He'd been planning, using me as an unwitting weapon in a war I didn't know existed. The realization should have made me angry. Instead, I felt a strange kinship with the old man who'd watched his company rot from within, unable to act directly but patient enough to wait for the right moment, the right person, the right catalyst. That night, I met with our network one last time before everything would accelerate beyond our control. "We have everything we need," Jennifer said, gesturing at the evidence covering her apartment walls. "The question is what we do with it." "We wait," I said, thinking of chess pieces and patient old men and assistants playing roles within roles. "Everything is positioned, but the timing has to be perfect." "How long?" Daniel asked. "2 more weeks. Let Lively get deeper into Sean's trust. Let me finish Albert's project and understand his endgame. Let the pieces settle into place." Because I was learning that revenge wasn't about explosive moments of satisfaction. It was about patience, positioning, and understanding that sometimes the best players were those who appeared not to be playing at all. The 2 weeks I'd asked for began with an ominous shift in the office atmosphere. Monday morning brought news that Reynolds Corporation had secured the Pembroke contract, a deal Sean had been promising the board for months. By noon, they'd also announced winning the Castellano Group partnership. 2 contracts worth $40 million combined, both snatched from Hartley Industries at the last moment. Sean called an emergency all-hands meeting at 2 p.m. The conference room filled with nervous energy as employees filed in, everyone sensing the storm about to break. He stood at the front, his usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled, tie loosened, eyes scanning the room like a predator seeking prey. "Someone in this room," he began, voice dangerously quiet, "is feeding information to our competitors." His gaze lingered on different faces trying to detect guilt. These contracts were guaranteed. The only way Reynolds could have undercut our proposals is if they knew our exact terms. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sean himself had given Lively every detail during their drinks last Tuesday, bragging about his negotiation strategy while she pretended to be fascinated by his business acumen. But he was too narcissistic to imagine he could be the security breach. "Until I find out who's responsible," he continued, "consider yourselves all under scrutiny. Every email monitored, every call logged, every meeting documented." His eyes found me in the crowd and stayed there. "Some of you might think you're too smart to get caught. You're not." The rest of the week deteriorated from there. Sean began appearing at my desk at random times, finding faults that didn't exist. On Tuesday, he made me redo a perfectly accurate analysis 3 times, claiming the font was unprofessional. On Wednesday, he assigned me to create a comprehensive report on paper-clip procurement efficiency, due in 24 hours. On Thursday, he announced in front of the entire floor that my workspace was disgracefully disorganized, despite it being immaculate. "Maybe if you focused less on appearances and more on performance," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "you'd understand why some people advance and others don't." The harassment was calculated to avoid legal action. Nothing explicitly discriminatory, nothing that couldn't be explained as strict management. But everyone could see the pattern. I'd become his stress relief, the safe target for his frustration about the lost contracts. Marcus passed me a note Friday afternoon. "He's spiraling. Be careful." The warning came too late. At 6:30 p.m., when most of the office had emptied for the weekend, Sean appeared at my cubicle. "My office?" "No. We need to discuss your quarterly report." I'd submitted the report a week ago. He'd already approved it. But I followed him, my phone recording in my pocket, every instinct screaming danger. His office felt different in the evening light. The mahogany desk that usually represented corporate authority now seemed like a barrier between me and the door. He closed it behind us and I heard the soft click of the lock engaging. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. But he didn't take his own seat. Instead, he moved to stand behind me too close, his cologne suffocating in the enclosed space. "You know, Beyonce," he began, his hand settling on my shoulder with unwelcome weight. "You could have a real future here. Senior management, corner office, the whole package. I believe my work speaks for itself, Mr. Hartley." His grip tightened slightly. "Work isn't everything. Sometimes advancement requires understanding the social dynamics of business. being more cooperative, more flexible. I stood, trying to put distance between us, but he moved with me, backing me against the wall of windows overlooking the city. I should go, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. The quarterly report seems to be in order. We're not done here. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist when I tried to move toward the door. His grip was hard enough to hurt, deliberately painful. You need to think very carefully about your choices. About whether you want to be someone who works with management or against it. Let go of me. I kept my voice calm, professional, even as his fingers pressed into my skin hard enough to leave marks. I'm trying to help you, he said, leaning closer. But you need to meet me halfway. Show some appreciation for the opportunities I've given you. The opportunity to have my work stolen? To be humiliated at company events. The words escaped before I could stop them. His face darkened. You should be grateful you even have a job. Do you know how many people would kill for your position? Then give it to one of them. I twisted my wrist free, feeling the skin burn from his grip. I'm leaving now. I made it to the door, fumbling with the lock while he stood behind me, close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. This conversation isn't over, he said as I finally got the door open. Monday morning we'll discuss your attitude problem. And your future at this company. I walked out on shaking legs, maintaining composure until I reached the bathroom. Jennifer was still there working late on HR reports. She took one look at my face and immediately locked the bathroom door behind us. What happened? I showed her my wrist, already purpling with fingerprint bruises. She photographed it from multiple angles while I filed a formal complaint on my phone, creating a digital timestamp even though we both knew it would never see official review. This is it, Jennifer said, her voice tight with anger. This is what takes him down. Financial crimes get fines. Stolen ideas get lawsuits. But this gets headlines. It's my word against his. Not for long. She pulled out her phone, texting rapidly. Lively needs to know. She'll get him talking, get him bragging. Men like Sean always brag about their conquests, even the failed ones. That weekend, I sat at my mother's dinner table, pushing food around my plate while she watched with growing concern. You've changed, she said finally. These past few weeks you've become harder somehow. Distant. My sister nodded. You seem like you're planning something. Or fighting something. But you won't tell us what. I wanted to explain everything. To show them the bruises hidden under my long sleeves. To describe the systematic destruction of my professional worth. To admit that I was transforming into someone capable of destroying another person's life without hesitation. Instead, I forced a smile. Work is challenging right now. But manageable. It won't be much longer. Until what? My mother pressed. Until things change, I said, which was true enough. That night I stood in my bathroom examining the bruises on my wrist. They were evidence, but they were also something else. A line crossed. A point of no return. Sean had finally made the mistake we'd been waiting for, though he didn't know it yet. Monday would come with its threatened discussion about my attitude and future. But Sean didn't know about the recording in my phone. About Lively already working to extract his confession. About the network of people documenting his every violation. The pressure point had been reached. Now it was only a matter of time before everything shattered. I spent Sunday night in my apartment, staring at the bruises on my wrist that had deepened to purple-black fingerprints. Tomorrow would bring Sean's promised discussion about my attitude, but I had other plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Lively. Need to see you. Now. We met at an all-night diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where nobody from Hartley Industries would ever appear. Lively sat in a back booth, her usually perfect appearance replaced with jeans and a sweater, looking younger and somehow more dangerous. I got it, she said without preamble, sliding her phone across the table. The recording was crystal clear. Sean's voice, slurred with expensive whiskey and arrogance, filled my earbuds as I listened. That uptight witch Beyonce finally learned her place. Thought she could reject me? I grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave a reminder about who has the power here. Lively's voice on the recording was perfectly calibrated, sympathetic but probing. That must have been frustrating, having an employee disrespect you like that. Disrespect. Sean laughed, ugly and sharp. She should be grateful I even noticed her. Some women need to learn the hard way about power dynamics. She'll either fall in line or she's gone. I'm thinking about firing her Monday, make an example of her. Won't that cause problems? HR issues. HR reports to me. The board trusts me. And Beyonce knows that nobody would believe her over me anyway. That's the beauty of power, you define reality. I pulled out the earbuds, my hands steady despite the rage burning in my chest. When was this? 3 hours ago. His apartment. He thinks we're building towards something romantic, but really he's building his own prosecution. Monday morning I arrived at the office at 8 a.m. instead of my usual 6. No point in maintaining the fiction of dedication anymore. I'd spent the early morning hours crafting my resignation letter. Brief, professional, giving no hint of what was coming. Sean was already in his office when I knocked. His expression when he saw me was predatory satisfaction mixed with disappointment that I hadn't come crawling to apologize. Beyonce. Ready to discuss your future? Yes, I said, placing the single sheet of paper on his desk. I'm resigning, effective immediately. He read it slowly, his smile growing with each line. The letter was perfect in its apparent defeat, thanking him for the opportunity, acknowledging that I wasn't suited for the demands of corporate leadership, wishing the company continued success. You were right, I said, keeping my voice small, defeated. I'm not cut out for this level. He leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment. Smart choice. Some people just aren't meant for leadership. They lack the necessary flexibility. I lowered my eyes, let my shoulders slump, gave him every signal of complete capitulation. I'll clean out my desk immediately. Good. And Beyonce. He waited until I looked up. This is what happens when you don't understand how the game is played. I nodded, turned to leave, then paused at the door. The quarterly board meeting is tomorrow, isn't it? Why do you care? You won't be here. Just wondering if you'll be presenting the Morrison merger final numbers. They were my last project after all. His smile was sharp. I'll be presenting MY merger strategy, yes. The one that will save this company $14 million. I nodded again and left, letting him think he'd won everything. Cleaning out my desk became a performance witnessed by the entire floor. I moved slowly, carefully, letting everyone see my apparent defeat. Jennifer stopped by, playing her part perfectly. I'm so sorry this didn't work out, she said loudly enough for others to hear, while slipping me a flash drive containing every HR violation from the past decade. Marcus walked past, didn't acknowledge me but left a sticky note on my monitor. All financial records secured. The board will have interesting reading tomorrow. Daniel sent an email to my personal account, subject line, good luck in your future endeavors, with attachments containing 5 years of documented fraud. Each personal item I packed was photographed first. The hidden awards, the 3 years of performance reviews, the email printouts showing my strategies before Sean claimed them. Everything legally obtained, everything admissible, everything necessary. Tom from accounting stopped by with fake sympathy. Shame to see you go. But honestly, you never really fit the culture here. You're right, I agreed. I never did learn to stay quiet and smile. Sandra from marketing actually seemed genuine in her goodbye. Whatever Sean said, we all know you were the brain behind half our successful projects. Doesn't matter what people know, I replied. Only what they're willing to say out loud. By noon, I was walking out with my box of belongings, Robert the security guard holding the door with sadness in his eyes. You deserved better, Miss Williams. I'll get exactly what I deserve, I told him. And so will everyone else. That evening, I sat in Thomas Reynolds' office overlooking the city. The contrast with Hartley Industries was stark. Modern where Hartley was traditional, transparent where Hartley was opaque, merit-based where Hartley was nepotistic. Last chance to reconsider, Thomas said, reviewing the documents spread across his desk. You could start here Monday, let Sean implode on his own, avoid the messiness of tomorrow's confrontation. He needs to know it was me, I said, thinking of every woman whose work he'd stolen, every employee he'd humiliated, every person he'd crushed for entertainment. When his world collapses, he needs to understand that the woman he tried to break is the one who broke him. Thomas studied me for a long moment. This isn't just about personal revenge anymore, is it? It never was just personal. It's about every person still trapped there, every woman who'll come after me, every brilliant mind that will be dismissed because it comes in the wrong package. The board meeting is at 9 a.m., Thomas said. My lawyers will be present as representatives of our 18% stake. The other shareholders I've been communicating with are ready to act. Your evidence is comprehensive. Are you prepared for what comes next? I thought about the recording of Sean bragging about assaulting me. The photographs of my bruised wrist. The years of documented theft and fraud. The network of allies ready to testify. I've been preparing for this for 3 years, I said. I just didn't know it until now. Tomorrow would bring the quarterly board meeting. Sean would walk in expecting to present my work as his own, expecting to bask in praise for his brilliant strategies. Instead, he would face the complete dismantling of everything he'd built on the foundation of other people's broken dreams. The resignation he'd accepted with such satisfaction was just the first move in a game he didn't know he was playing. By leaving today, I'd position myself outside his reach, free to act without the constraints of employment, without the fear of retaliation. The trap was set. The evidence was assembled. The allies were in position. All that remained was the execution. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes everything appear sharper, more consequential. I stood outside the Hartley Industries building at 8:45 a.m., no longer an employee but something far more dangerous. A shareholder's representative with evidence that would reshape everything. The security guard at the desk was new, someone who didn't recognize me from my 3 years of early mornings and late nights. I'm here for the board meeting, I said, presenting the documentation Thomas Reynolds' legal team had prepared. You're not on the list, he said, frowning at his computer screen. Check again. Reynolds Corporation. 18% stake. We have the right to attend all board meetings. He made a phone call, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable as someone on the other end apparently confirmed my credentials. Elevator to the 20th floor, he said finally, handing me a visitor's badge that felt like vindication. The boardroom door was already open when I arrived, the space filling with the usual pre-meeting choreography of coffee pouring and small talk. I recognized every face. Board members who'd laughed at Sean's party joke, executives who'd benefited from my stolen work, and there at the head of the table Sean himself, arranging his presentation materials with the confidence of someone who didn't know his world was about to end. Excuse me, Richard from finance intercepted me at the doorway. This is a closed board meeting. Not anymore, I said, handing him the legal documentation. Reynolds Corporation owns 18% of Hartley Industries as of market close yesterday. I'm here as their official representative. The room went silent. Sean looked up from his papers, his face cycling through expressions like a slot machine. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally the first flicker of fear. You don't work here anymore, he stated as if saying it could make it true. No, I agreed, taking a seat at the table with deliberate calm. I work for your largest shareholder now. Shall we discuss why that position became necessary? Albert Hartley, sitting in his usual corner spot, watched with an expression I couldn't quite read. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, sensing the atmospheric change but not yet understanding its implications. This is highly irregular, Sean said, trying to regain control. You can't just. Actually, I can. I opened my briefcase with theatrical precision, removing 3 folders that I'd arranged specifically for this moment. Before you present the Morrison merger numbers, my numbers incidentally, the board needs to review some critical information about corporate governance failures. The first folder slid across the polished table toward Richard. 5 years of fraudulent financial reporting. Inflated projections, hidden losses, shifted costs between divisions to create the illusion of growth. Securities fraud, Mr. Hartley. Federal crime territory. Richard opened the folder, his face draining of color as he recognized his own signature on documents he thought had been destroyed. The second folder went to Margaret Chin, the longest-serving board member. Personnel documentation. 17 women whose intellectual property was systematically stolen and credited to male supervisors. 32 harassment complaints buried in HR. A pattern of discrimination that exposes this company to approximately $40 million in liability, conservative estimate. Margaret's hands trembled as she reviewed the evidence, each page time-stamped, documented, undeniable. This is a pathetic attempt at revenge, Sean said, but his voice had lost its usual authority. A disgruntled employee making baseless accusations. Baseless. I held up the third folder but didn't open it yet. Let's discuss Basel. Specifically, your meeting there last month with Patterson Industries, where you disclosed our entire acquisition strategy in exchange for a personal consulting fee. Corporate espionage, Mr. Hartley. Also recorded, by the way. You're lying. Am I? Should we discuss your 4-month relationship with someone you've been sharing our bid strategies with? Someone you met for drinks every Tuesday and Thursday? Sean's jaw tightened. My personal life is not board business. It is when you're sharing insider information with her. I finally opened the third folder, revealing photographs that made several board members gasp. These were taken in your office, in the corporate apartment the company pays for, timestamps showing your meetings over the past 4 months. Sarah, Sean's fiancée, had been sitting quietly in the corner, invited to present the family values portion of the quarterly report. She stood slowly, her face a mask of controlled fury. That's my fiancé, Sean said desperately, the lie obvious to everyone. No, I corrected, pulling out the final photograph. A clear shot of Lively's Reynolds Corporation ID badge on Sean's desk. That's Lively Morrison, executive assistant at Reynolds Corporation. The woman you've been feeding our strategies to while trying to seduce her. Sarah walked out without a word, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown to destruction. But that's not even the worst part, I continued, connecting my phone to the boardroom's audio system. This is. Sean's voice filled the room, slurred and arrogant. That uptight which Beyoncé finally learned her place. I grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave a reminder about who has the power here. The recording continued, each word another nail in his professional coffin. Board members exchanged horrified looks. Margaret Chen covered her mouth in disgust. Assault, I said simply. Recorded confession. Plus documentation of the physical evidence. I showed them the photographs Jennifer had taken of my bruised wrist, the formal complaint I'd filed, the paper trail that proved a pattern of escalating harassment. The room erupted. Board members shouting over each other, demanding explanations, threatening legal action. Sean stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air, unable to form words that could save him. Then Albert Hartley stood. The room fell silent immediately. The founder commanded that kind of respect even in chaos. I motion for the immediate removal of Sean Hartley as CEO, he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of patience finally exhausted. Sean turned to his uncle, shock replacing anger. Uncle Albert, you can't. I've been documenting your failures for 3 years, Albert continued, his gaze never leaving his nephew's face. Every stolen idea, every buried complaint, every financial manipulation. I hoped you would grow into the position, would learn to lead with integrity. Instead, you've proven that nepotism is a poison that destroys companies from within. He turned to me and for the first time I saw approval in his eyes. Ms. Williams has provided the catalyst for the change Hartley Industries desperately needs. She has my full support and my vote. All in favor of removing Sean Hartley as CEO? Margaret Chen's voice was steady despite the chaos. Every hand raised except Sean's own. Motion carries, Margaret announced. Security, please escort Mr. Hartley from the building. 2 security guards entered. Robert among them, I noticed with grim satisfaction. Sean was still sputtering about lawsuits, about family betrayal, about conspiracies as they guided him toward the door. He stopped at the threshold, turning back to look at me. You destroyed everything. No, I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. I documented everything. You destroyed it all by yourself. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the boardroom. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence, processing the complete reversal of power that had just occurred in less than 20 minutes. Reynolds Corporation has some thoughts about interim leadership, I said, pulling out one final document. But first, we need to discuss the real numbers behind the Morrison merger. The accurate ones, not the fiction Mr. Hartley was about to present. The board leaned forward, ready to listen to the woman they'd ignored for 3 years, understanding finally that invisible didn't mean powerless. Margaret Chen's voice cut through the boardroom's stunned silence. We need to address the immediate crisis. Without a CO and with these revelations public, our stock will crater at market open. I closed my presentation folder, having shown them the real numbers behind the Morrison merger. The board members looked shell-shocked, processing not just Sean's removal but the depth of deception they'd been blind to for years. Reynolds Corporation has a proposal, I said, pulling out the transition plan Thomas and I had developed. A managed acquisition rather than a hostile takeover. Better severance packages for employees, protection for pension funds, and retention of key personnel who weren't complicit in the fraud. Albert Hartley studied the document, his expression unreadable. You're offering to save the company that humiliated you? I'm offering to save the people who work here. The company as Sean built it deserves to die. The weeks that followed blurred together in a cascade of consequences I hadn't fully anticipated. From my new office at Reynolds Corporation, I watched Hartley Industries transform from a 40-year institution into a cautionary tale told in business schools and boardrooms. The first wave hit within days. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story, Hartley Industries CEO ousted amid fraud, assault allegations. The stock dropped 30% in pre-market trading. By closing bell it had lost half its value. Investors who'd trusted Sean's inflated projections discovered their portfolios hemorrhaging worth. Thomas Reynolds moved with surgical precision, identifying which parts of Hartley Industries could be salvaged and which needed to be eliminated. Every client Sean had alienated over the years received personal calls with better offers and sincere apologies. The Morrison account, Patterson Industries, even smaller clients who'd been overcharged and underserved. All of them moved their business to Reynolds Corporation or our allied firms. It's almost too easy, Thomas told me one morning, reviewing the latest defection. Sean made so many enemies that they're practically racing to abandon ship. But watching from my executive suite, I saw more than numbers and contracts changing hands. I saw the human wreckage. Marcus called me 3 weeks after the boardroom confrontation. They're laying off the entire first floor, he said, his usually steady voice cracking. Maintenance, cafeteria, mailroom, everyone who had nothing to do with this. I drove to Hartley Industries that afternoon, no longer an employee but unable to stay away. The lobby felt like a funeral parlor. Robert sat on a bench outside, a cardboard box of personal items beside him, his security uniform replaced with civilian clothes that made him look smaller, older. 30 years, he said when he saw me. 30 years of honest work and I'm out because the CEO was a criminal. I'm sorry, I said, the words pathetically inadequate. You did what you had to do, he replied, but his eyes held an accusation my guilt readily accepted. Just wish it hadn't taken so many good people down with the bad. The janitor who'd always worked late alongside me, the cafeteria woman who knew everyone's coffee order, the maintenance man who'd fixed my desk drawer without being asked. All of them casualties of a war between executives they'd never even met properly. Jennifer stayed on temporarily, helping to process the layoffs she'd once documented as discrimination cases. The irony isn't lost on me, she said during one of our calls. I wanted to save these people from Sean, and instead I'm handing them termination papers. Daniel worked 18-hour days trying to salvage retirement accounts, minimize losses for employees who'd invested their 401ks in company stock based on Sean's fraudulent projections. Some of these people are 65, Beyonce. They were planning to retire next year. Now they'll be working until they die. The weight of unintended consequences pressed against my chest every morning when I woke up in my new apartment, the one my Reynolds Corporation salary afforded. I'd wanted justice, but justice apparently came with a body count I hadn't calculated. Meanwhile, Sean's personal destruction played out in public with grotesque thoroughness. Sarah, his former fiancée, gave an exclusive interview to Business Insider, detailing not just his infidelity but his systematic emotional manipulation, his casual cruelty, his profound narcissism. The story went viral, shared with savage satisfaction by everyone who'd ever been diminished by a powerful man. His country club membership was revoked after 3 members complained about unpaid loans. His investment accounts, heavily leveraged against Hartley Industries stock, evaporated. The penthouse apartment was foreclosed. The Mercedes repossessed. Marcus sent me photos from his surveillance. Sean at a dive bar at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, unshaven, wearing the same suit 3 days in a row. Sean leaving another failed interview, his resume now toxic to any company that Googled his name. Sean sitting alone at a coffee shop, scrolling through his phone with the hollow expression of someone reading about their own funeral. He's applied to 43 companies, Marcus reported. Not one callback. He's untouchable. I should have felt victorious. Instead I felt empty. My mother visited my new office on a Thursday afternoon, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the original artwork, the view of the city that once felt impossibly out of reach. Her pride was evident but complicated by something else, a wariness I recognized from looking in my own mirror. "You got everything you wanted," she said carefully, sitting across from my massive desk. "Yes," I agreed, though the word tasted like ash. Was it worth it? I thought about Robert's forced retirement, about the janitor now looking for work at 62, about the junior analysts whose careers ended before they began. Then I thought about the 17 women whose work Sean stole, the 32 harassment complaints he buried, the 3 years of systematic humiliation I'd endured. "I don't know," I admitted. She reached across the desk, taking my hand in hers. "The daughter I raised would have known. She would have said justice is always worth it. The daughter you raised didn't understand that justice and revenge are different things. That one builds and the other only destroys. And which did you choose?" I looked out at the city, at the building that once housed Hartley Industries, now bearing a for lease sign. Both. Neither. Something in between that doesn't have a clean name. That evening, alone in my office as the city lights began to flicker on, I pulled up the final report on Hartley Industries' dissolution. 600 jobs lost. 40 million in shareholder value destroyed. One company's 40-year legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about toxic leadership and the people who finally said enough. The girl who'd cried in her car after being humiliated at a party was gone. In her place sat someone who could orchestrate destruction with spreadsheets and evidence, who could watch a man's life implode and feel both satisfaction and revulsion. I'd won everything and lost something unnamed but essential. The cost of revenge, I was learning, wasn't paid by the victim. It was paid by everyone in proximity to the explosion, including the person who lit the fuse. My phone rang at 11 p.m., 3 weeks after the dissolution papers for Hartley Industries had been filed. The number was private, but somehow I knew who it would be before I answered. "Ms. Williams." Albert Hartley's voice carried an unusual note, satisfaction mixed with something else I couldn't identify. "I believe it's time we had an honest conversation." I set down my glass of wine and moved to my home office, sensing this call would require my full attention. "Mr. Hartley, I wondered when you would reach out. Did you enjoy the chess match?" His tone was almost conversational, as if we were discussing weather rather than the destruction of his family's company. Watching all the pieces move exactly where they needed to be. "I don't understand what you mean." His laugh was dry, papery, like autumn leaves crumbling. "Of course you do. You're too intelligent to have missed the patterns. Shall I illuminate them anyway?" I remained silent, waiting. 3 years ago a resume crossed my desk. Beyonce Williams. MIT graduate, first-generation college student, daughter of a single mother who cleaned offices to pay for her child's education. Perfect grades, brilliant mind, and most importantly, hungry. Not just for success but for recognition, for proof that merit could overcome circumstance. My hand tightened on the phone. "You hired me specifically. I interviewed 437 candidates for that position. You were overqualified, undervalued, and psychologically perfect for what I needed. Someone Sean would dismiss as decorative. Someone brilliant enough to create innovations he'd want to steal. Someone with enough suppressed anger at systemic injustice to eventually channel it into something useful." The room seemed to tilt. Every moment of the past 3 years suddenly required re-examination. "You planned this." "All of it." "Planned is too rigid a word." "I created conditions." "You exceeded my wildest expectations with your execution." I could hear him settling into a chair, preparing for a longer conversation. The party humiliation, I couldn't have orchestrated that. But I knew Sean's nature. Given enough time, enough proximity to excellence he couldn't claim credit for, he would inevitably reveal himself. "Why?" The word came out raw. "He was your nephew. Your brother's son." Precisely why I couldn't act directly. Family politics, inheritance law, board dynamics. All prevented me from simply removing him. But a brilliant woman he'd wronged? Someone with no family connections to complicate matters? You could do what I never could. I sank into my desk chair, processing the implications. The special project. The access to archives. You were feeding me evidence. I was providing tools. You chose how to use them. Every document you found, every pattern you identified, those were real. I simply ensured you had access to see them. And Thomas Reynolds? Was he part of this? Thomas has wanted to destroy Sean since they were teenagers. When I suggested that a certain brilliant analyst at Hartley Industries might be receptive to an offer, he was eager to participate. Though I suspect his feelings toward you have become genuine. You impressed him in ways that had nothing to do with my orchestration. I thought about every late night, every stolen idea, every moment of humiliation I'd endured thinking I was alone in seeing the injustice. You watched me suffer for 3 years. Used my pain as a weapon. I watched you transform pain into power. There's a difference. His voice carried no apology. Tell me, would you have preferred to remain invisible forever? To watch your brilliance claimed by lesser minds until you finally gave up and accepted mediocrity? The answer should have been easy, but it wasn't. You manipulated me. I selected you. What you did with that selection was entirely your choice. You could have simply left, taken another job, moved on. Instead, you built a network, gathered evidence, orchestrated one of the most thorough corporate destructions I've ever witnessed. That wasn't my manipulation. That was your nature revealing itself. By nature. The words tasted bitter. You mean my capacity for revenge. I mean your refusal to accept injustice. Your strategic mind. Your ability to play a long game while everyone else focuses on immediate gratification. He paused. Qualities that make an excellent CEO incidentally. Hartley Industries is dead. But Hartley Global will rise from its ashes. I'm rebuilding it, selecting each piece carefully. The company my brother built that Sean corrupted will become something worthy again. And I need someone to lead it. You want me to run the company where I was humiliated? I want you to transform it into a company where that humiliation would be impossible. Where merit matters more than nepotism. Where brilliance is recognized regardless of the body it inhabits. His voice grew serious. I'm 73 years old, Ms. Williams. I have perhaps 5 good years left. I need a successor who understands both creation and destruction, who's proven they can do what needs to be done even when it costs them pieces of their soul. The weight of his words settled over me like a lead blanket. You're offering me your empire. I'm offering you the chance to build your own empire on foundations I'll help you lay. But understand, accepting means becoming what you fought against. It means making decisions that hurt good people for the greater good. It means sometimes being the villain in someone else's story. I stood and walked to my window looking out at the city lights. In the reflection I saw myself, designer suit, executive bearing, eyes that had grown harder in recent months. I already am those things. Yes, he agreed simply. The question is whether you'll use that transformation for something meaningful or let it poison you with guilt. And if I refuse? Then you remain at Reynolds Corporation, successful but limited. Thomas is brilliant, but he's driven by old wounds. You'd always be a weapon in his arsenal against enemies you don't share. With me, you'd be the architect of something entirely new. I thought about Robert, unemployed at 60. About the janitor, the cafeteria staff, all the collateral damage of my revenge. What about the people who lost their jobs? The new Hartley Global will hire them back. First positions filled, full benefits restored, retirement accounts made whole. I've already allocated funds for it. You've thought of everything. I've had 3 years to plan while watching you develop into exactly who I hoped you'd become. His voice softened slightly. You're angry about being used. You should be. But consider, would you rather have remained powerless and right, or become powerful and complicated? The question hung in the air between us, across the miles of phone connection. In my reflection, I saw the woman I'd become. Someone capable of orchestrating destruction, of watching a man's life crumble and feeling satisfaction alongside revulsion. But I also saw someone who could build, who could create structures that prevented future Seans from rising through corruption. I need time to consider your offer, I said finally. Take all the time you need. But know this, what happened to Sean wasn't revenge. It was correction. The system was broken, rewarding the wrong behaviors, crushing the wrong people. You fixed it, albeit violently. The question now is whether you'll help build something better or leave that work to others. After he hung up, I sat in my dark office, grappling with the revelation that my entire career at Hartley Industries had been a carefully orchestrated test. I'd passed, but the prize was transformation into someone I wasn't sure I wanted to be. Someone who could calculate human cost against strategic gain and proceed anyway. The girl who'd stumbled at a party 3 years ago was gone. The woman who'd orchestrated Sean's destruction was here. And now I had to decide whether to embrace what I'd become or spend the rest of my life running from it. The weight of Albert Hartley's offer pressed against my thoughts for 3 days before Thomas Reynolds called me into his corner office. The morning sun cast long shadows across his mahogany desk as he studied me with an expression I'd learned to recognize. The calculating assessment of a chess player considering his next move. "Albert Hartley made you an offer," he said without preamble. It wasn't a question. "He did," I confirmed, settling into the leather chair across from him. Thomas leaned back, his fingers steepled. "I could match it. Better it, actually. Full partnership at Reynolds Corporation. 40% equity vested over 5 years. Your name on the building next to mine." He paused, letting the magnitude of the offer sink in. Together we could acquire what's left of Hartley Industries for pennies, strip the valuable assets, and build something twice as powerful. The offer was everything I'd dreamed of when I first accepted his job proposal. Power, wealth, recognition, all the things denied to me during my time under Sean's thumb. But as I looked at Thomas, I saw something familiar in his eyes. The same cold calculation I'd glimpsed in my own reflection lately. The same capacity to view human costs as acceptable casualties in strategic warfare. "You'd want to destroy it completely," I said. "Salt the earth where Hartley Industries stood. Wouldn't you?" His smile was sharp. "After what they did to you?" I thought about the security guard who'd lost his retirement, the cafeteria workers scrambling for new jobs, the junior analysts whose careers had been derailed through no fault of their own. What they did to me is done. What I did in response affected hundreds of innocent people. Collateral damage is inevitable in corporate warfare. Those 5 words crystallized my decision. I stood, smoothing my skirt with hands that no longer trembled in the presence of powerful men. "Thank you for the opportunity, Thomas. You gave me the platform to reclaim my dignity when no one else would. But I need to build something that creates rather than destroys." His expression shifted through surprise to something that might have been respect. "You're going to accept Albert's offer. With conditions. He's using you just as much as I would. Perhaps. But he's offering me the chance to prevent future Seans rather than just punish current ones." I moved toward the door, then turned back. "We both learned to weaponize injustice, Thomas. The difference is I want to stop needing weapons." He nodded slowly. "When you fail, and idealism always fails in corporate reality, my offer stands." That afternoon I met Albert Hartley in the conference room of a neutral law firm, surrounded by the remnants of Hartley Industries board. Margaret Chin sat at the far end, her expression guarded. Richard from finance had been replaced by an interim CFO whose name I hadn't bothered to learn. 3 other board members I recognized from that awful party, people who'd laughed at Sean's cruelty and now needed my cooperation to salvage their investments. "Before we discuss terms," I said, pulling out a document thicker than my wrist, "you need to understand what you're agreeing to." Albert's eyebrows rose slightly as I laid out my conditions. Complete restructuring of corporate governance with transparent promotion processes that couldn't be overridden by executive preference. Protected whistleblower programs with third-party oversight. Mandatory mentorship programs pairing senior staff with marginalized employees. Psychological evaluations for anyone in positions of power. And most critically, a board structure that prevented any single person from accumulating the unchecked authority Sean had wielded. "This is radical," Margaret said, reviewing the proposals. "No company operates with this level of transparency. No successful company has needed to rebuild from complete moral bankruptcy," I countered. "We're not trying to recreate what existed. We're building something that couldn't have produced a Sean Hartley." "The investors will balk," the interim CFO warned. "These policies will cut into profit margins. The investors are lucky to get anything back after the fraud Sean committed under your oversight." My voice carried the edge I'd developed during months of planning revenge. They can accept ethical leadership or watch their remaining equity become worthless. Albert had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he spoke. "What about personnel? Who would you bring back?" This was the part that mattered most to me. Everyone who lost their jobs due to the collapse, provided they weren't complicit in the fraud. Robert, the security guard, he becomes head of building security with full restoration of his pension. The cafeteria staff, the maintenance crews, the junior analysts, all offered positions with signing bonuses equal to their lost wages. That's millions in unnecessary expense, Richard protested. That's justice, I corrected. And it sends a message about what Hartley Global values. The room fell silent. Board members exchanged glances, calculating whether cooperation or resistance would better serve their interests. Finally, Albert stood. I motion to accept all terms as presented, he said. Ms. Williams has proven she understands both the price of corruption and the value of integrity. Hartley Global needs leadership that employees can trust, investors can believe in, and competitors must respect. She's the only person in this room who can deliver that. The vote was unanimous, though given their lack of alternatives, it could hardly have been otherwise. Over the next months, building proved infinitely harder than destroying. Every policy required negotiation, every hire demanded scrutiny, every decision balanced between idealism and pragmatism. Former employees approached with mixture of hope and suspicion. Some, like Robert, returned immediately, grateful for the second chance. Others needed convincing that Hartley Global would be different from its predecessor. Jennifer accepted the position of Chief Human Resources Officer after making me promise that she'd never have to bury another complaint. Marcus took the role of Financial Oversight Director with the understanding that his loyalty was to accuracy, not authority. Even Daniel from accounting returned, his paranoid attention to detail now channeled into creating unbreakable audit systems. The surprise came from unexpected quarters. Tom, who'd stolen my risk assessment models, approached with genuine humility. I knew what I was doing was wrong, he admitted during his interview. But I was too weak to refuse when Sean offered me credit. I want to earn the expertise I claimed to have. I hired him as a junior analyst, reporting to someone he'd previously outranked. He accepted without complaint. Sandra from marketing, who told me to smile more, became one of our strongest advocates for reform. I enforced toxic culture because I thought it was the only way to survive, she explained. Give me the chance to market something worth believing in. Not everyone deserved redemption. Brad, whose wall of stolen achievements had mocked my contributions, was permanently banned from the building. Others who'd actively participated in harassment found their applications rejected without explanation. Mercy had limits. 6 months had passed since establishing the new policies at Hartley Global, and the transformation was beginning to show measurable results. Employee retention had increased by 40%, 3 major clients who'd fled during the collapse had returned, and tonight, we would officially relaunch the company at a gala that felt heavy with symbolism. The Meridian Hotel's ballroom had been transformed with subtle elegance. The same space where my public humiliation had occurred 2 years ago now decorated in Hartley Global's new colors. Deep blue and silver representing both depth and clarity. I stood at the entrance in a black dress that made no apologies for ambition or success, watching the room fill with employees, investors, clients, and journalists who'd come to witness what everyone privately called the resurrection. Robert greeted guests at the door in his new role as head of security, his dignity restored along with his pension. The catering staff, many of whom we'd rehired from the old company, moved through the crowd with professional pride. Jennifer circulated among the HR representatives from other companies, spreading word about our revolutionary whistleblower protections. Marcus discussed transparent financial practices with potential investors who seemed genuinely intrigued rather than skeptical. At precisely 8 o'clock I approached the podium, the same one where Sean had once held court, where he'd presented my strategies as his innovations to thunderous applause. The room quieted as I adjusted the microphone, the weight of the moment settling over everyone present. 2 years ago many of us learned a difficult truth. I began, my voice steady and clear. That brilliance without power is often invisible, while power without brilliance is ultimately unsustainable. Tonight we're not here to celebrate the death of what was, but the birth of what should always have been. A company where competence and authority exist in balance, where merit matters more than connections, where creating value doesn't require destroying people. I didn't mention Sean by name, didn't need to. Everyone knew the story. The woman humiliated at a company party who'd orchestrated the downfall of a corrupt CEO. But I refused to let that narrative define us. Hartley Global isn't built on revenge. I continued. It's built on the radical idea that treating employees with dignity, recognizing talent wherever it exists, and maintaining transparent operations isn't just ethically correct, it's profitable. Our quarterly reports prove what should have been obvious. People work harder for companies that respect them, clients trust organizations that operate with integrity, and investors believe in leadership that doesn't require deception to succeed. The applause was warm, genuine in a way corporate applause rarely achieved. But 20 minutes into my speech, my phone vibrated with an urgent message from security. I finished my remarks, handed the program to Margaret Chin and stepped into the hallway. "He's in the lobby," the security supervisor informed me through the phone. "Intoxicated, demanding to speak with you." I moved to the security office where monitors showed the building's entrance. There he was, Sean Hartley, disheveled in a wrinkled suit that had seen better days, swaying slightly as he argued with the guards. His face was gaunt, his former confidence replaced with the desperate energy of someone with nothing left to lose. Through the monitor, I watched him notice the new company logo, his family name now paired with Global instead of Industries, my name listed as CEO on the building directory where his had once been. He stood there for a long moment, absorbing the complete erasure of his legacy. Then he looked directly at the security camera, knowing I would be watching. His lips moved clearly enough to read, "You win." The guards began escorting him out, but I found myself thinking he was wrong. This wasn't winning. Winning implied a game with clear rules and endpoints. What I'd done was survive, transform, and build something from the wreckage of what he'd corrupted. That was both less than victory and more than revenge. "Don't press charges," I told security. "Just ensure he gets home safely." Because I understood something now that I hadn't 2 years ago. Sean was already living in the prison of his own making. Every day he woke up to the consequences of his choices, while I woke up to the possibilities of mine. Returning to my office after the gala, I stood before the photograph I kept on my bookshelf. That moment at the party when Sean had reduced me to my physical appearance while the room laughed. Young employees often asked about it, wondering why I'd keep such a painful reminder visible. "That's my origin story," I would tell them, though the truth was more complex. The photograph served as a meditation on transformation. How humiliation could become fuel, how powerlessness could forge determination, how the worst moment of your professional life could become the catalyst for everything that followed. A knock at my door interrupted my reflection. Sarah, one of our new junior analysts, entered hesitantly. She was brilliant, first-generation college student like I'd been, carrying that same hunger for recognition that had driven me to Hartley Industries originally. "Ms. Williams, I wanted to thank you for the mentorship program. Having someone actually see my work, acknowledge my contributions, it means everything." I studied her eager face and saw myself from another lifetime. "Never let anyone make you invisible, Sarah. And if they try, remember that invisibility can be a strategic advantage if you know how to use it." She left with the confused expression of someone who'd received advice they wouldn't understand until they needed it. I hoped she never would. The final quarterly report sat on my desk, waiting for tomorrow's board review. The numbers told a story of success. Revenue up 18%, employee satisfaction at an industry-leading 87%, investor confidence fully restored. But numbers couldn't capture the full transformation. They couldn't show Robert training new security staff with renewed pride. They couldn't demonstrate Jennifer's relief at never having to bury another harassment complaint. They couldn't measure the young women who now submitted bold proposals without fear of having them stolen. They couldn't quantify the cultural shift from fear-based compliance to trust-based innovation. I thought about Thomas Reynolds' prediction that idealism would fail in corporate reality. He was partially right. Pure idealism had given way to pragmatic idealism, the kind that understood you couldn't save everyone but refused to stop trying to save anyone. Albert Hartley, now chairman emeritus, had sent a note earlier. "You've exceeded even my highest expectations. The company my brother built has become what he always claimed it was but never achieved. A true meritocracy." The city lights sparkled beyond my window as midnight approached. Somewhere out there, Sean was probably still drinking, still raging against the woman who'd destroyed him. But I wasn't thinking about him anymore. I was thinking about tomorrow's initiatives, next quarter's expansion, the 5-year plan that would make Hartley Global an industry leader in both profits and principles. Because in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't his destruction. It was my reconstruction. Not just of a company but of myself. The woman who'd stumbled at that party was gone, but what had emerged from her ashes was something more powerful than she could have imagined. Someone who understood that true strength came not from crushing others but from lifting them, not from hiding brilliance but from illuminating it wherever it existed. The transformation was complete, but the work was just beginning. If this story of strategic revenge kept you riveted until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Beyonce walked into that boardroom representing Reynolds Corporation, watching Sean's face cycle through disbelief as he realized his biggest victim had become his largest shareholder. What was your most satisfying moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more compelling stories of transformation and triumph. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.